I'm going to open it up to the floor now, basically, because I mean, I suppose Stacey's posed some really important questions in terms of self-reflection. You know, are we part of the solution? Are we part of the problem? And it is something you've got to question yourself all the time in terms of the actions that we take. Because as community workers, we are in particular positions of power in a lot of instances, and we really do need to reflect on the actions that we take. So would anybody from the floor like to ask a question or make a comment? You just the floor is open. Anybody?
Just Laurie Wheelahan here, just to say that the last 5 years it's been increasingly difficult to have a voice heard at any policy making tables when you're dealing with what I suppose what yous were involved in last week was like it's at the tendering, the procurement, all of that. So I think consistently community workers have to battle all the time to actually have community development across the table at any conversation when it comes to community work at the moment. So that definitely has an impact on your own voice, but also on empowering other people. Your energy is forever going into keeping your own voice heard. So how can you empower others who are coming from a much more harder platform to talk from if you're consistently feeling like you're battling? But all I can say is we have to, because we have a platform like Eileen said to speak from, we have to continue speaking. We have to continue speaking, and even if it doesn't want to be heard, we have to be heard, because otherwise we can't empower those who need help to be at the platform as well.
That's a really important point, Laurie, and I don't know if any of the speakers want to comment on that, but certainly I suppose working in a local development company myself, I felt the burden of tendering, etc., etc. Any of the speakers want to comment on that?
No, just before I go, because I have to head. Sorry, Stacia. Sorry, I'm going to head now. I think we can use platforms to a positive and to create positive energies for communities. But I also think we can use platforms very negatively as well, you know. And I do think we need to be very careful around that, and around how do we feed into negative platforms, you know, around adding fuel to people who are being racist or being discriminated towards. Because I think sometimes if you look at the Trumps and the Gemma O'Dohertys of the world, you know, if you comment into those kind of people, you're only adding fuel into their fire. So how do we as community, you know, like there's a conversation I think needs to be had around that, around positive messaging and social media as well. And, you know, like for me in the situation I'm in right now, by God, I feel like I have the whole of Ireland on my shoulders, and I'm responsible for 40,000 travellers. And, you know, it's absolutely really tough to feel that level of responsibility, but through the eyes of a community development worker. And if you do things from a community development perspective, well then I don't think you can go wrong. And if you reach out to the other community services, or sorry, not services, organisations around you, such as ENAR and other organisations, you know, that and get the supports. But I do think it's a conversation that needs to be had around platforms and how we use those platforms, you know, as community development workers and as activists as well. I have to run. Great to see you all.
Thank you so much, Eileen, and we look forward to working with you going forward. We'll be behind you all the way.
I'll see you. Thanks a million.
Right,
thank you.
Bye. Does anybody else have any quick comments or questions they want to raise?
Yeah, I had one, and it was about Stacia mentioned around the rise of fascism at times like this, that, you know, and obviously Eileen just mentioned the dangers in social media, and I'm aware very much at the moment about tensions being created between marginalized groups and their allies. And it's about how we actually, I suppose, voice some of the tensions that are there, some of the things work. We know that we have to carry on working because people are obviously hurt and they're lashing out. But I think that what I'm seeing at the moment is something quite divisive that's being started, and I believe it's intentional to pull the groups that are striving for real change apart, to make them split from each other, but also to internally split them. And I just wonder if the speakers have any, I suppose, comments or ideas on how we actually approach that. That rise of the right, especially in the way they're using social media to attack the very groups that are actually active in trying to stop racism.
Okay, Ruben, Stacia?
Yeah, I'm gonna go for it there. One of the things that I know is that fighting racism is not a popular thing, and you'll always be creating enemies wherever you go. But you have to take the stand, because if you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. So what we need to do is we need to be very careful in how we approach the groups that that are fighting against those who are standing up to racism. And you cannot do it on your own. It's about collaboration. So finding your own allies and how are they doing it. So you look at groups that have, because as community workers, we all work from the same standards and values. And you look at those groups that are working with the same standards and values as yourself, and see how can you build your forces together, and what resources do you have, and how have other people done it? Because racism has been around for a long time, and a lot of groups have challenged it. And unfortunately, there's not any group that I know that in Ireland that has fought against racism and succeeded to eliminate it in anywhere in the world anyway. It's something that's always going to be there with us, but we still have to keep on speaking against it. Just because the right groups are fighting against it, it doesn't mean that we stop, we keep fighting, but we look at solidarity and approaching it with numbers, not just as individuals or one group, because I know we work in different areas. So someone might be feeling isolated, maybe Mayo or Donegal, but there are other people who are doing the same work. So finding out what other groups are doing and then sharing the information, I think that will work.
Could I just say something, Stephanie McDermott here? I think, you know, it's really important as community, people who are working in the community, whether we call ourselves community development or whatever, but it's really about, for me, it's about challenging the discourse. So I'm looking at here, CD, community development, but also about it's CD challenging the, you know, the discourse that is there. And I suppose we all have a role to play in challenging our own bias, because we all have it, you know, our unconscious bias and bias. And I think it's really, really important in terms of challenging very subtle racism that's around. You know, people I think now know that it is not appropriate to be outwardly racist, and they will only do that on platforms, you know, that they're going to get some, you know, some likes for. But there's a lot of subtle racism around that we can challenge, and as Ruben said, no, it's not a popular thing, but you are talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of a narrative that is going around in terms of a hierarchy of people, you know, whether that's white men at the top and then white women or whatever, it goes right down to the bottom. So I think it's really, really important in community development to challenge and challenge and challenge all of the time. It doesn't make you popular, but as Ruben said, if you stand for nothing, you really stand for everything. So we have to, you know, we as people, there's a very small minority of us really working in this area. You know, the majority of people perhaps are well-intentioned, as Anastasia says, and good intentions, as Anastasia said, are not good enough. You know, we really, really have to do something, and it's on the move, and we see it on the move. And if anyone had the opportunity to read the Irish Times there 2 weeks ago with the whole weekend supplement, I mean, it was a real eye-opener in terms of people's voices, and that's what we need to hear, you know, people's voices. And again, as Eileen said, you know, it's nothing about us without us. And it's really about asking people, like, what do you want to be called, or how do you feel about that comment? And, you know, so that's all I have to say. So great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'm just going to ask, Stacia, do you have a final comment?
Yeah.
Because I think we're going to need to wrap up now.
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. Just a few things. First of all, I wouldn't be totally pessimistic. You know, I think that stark situations throw things into light relief. And I also do feel we have made some progress with regard to racism. I mean, it took a long time to get this country to acknowledge that there was racism in Ireland in the first place, and that it was experienced by travellers and other people here for a long time. It has been possible to get laws at a European Union level, and a number of us in Ireland were directly involved in campaigning through the 90s to get the directives on racism, which then we were able to inflict back here and through the Equality Authority and other things, and then able to get Ireland to ratify CERD, because now we had a law after all, and then succeeded in getting some things in place like the National Consultative Committee on Racism and Interculturalism. So some changes, you know, there has been progress. And if you look back to then, if you look back 30 years, even 25 years, and now, we're having a discussion now that would have been difficult to have 25 or 30 years ago. I know when we started Pavey Point, for example, we were kind of not particularly welcomed to be talking about racism in Ireland, because after all, that was a North-South global issue, you know, and should you not be supporting those who are actually addressing racism in the global South instead of rapping on about what's happening here? So the first thing I'd say is something is possible. Second thing I'd say is it's possible only if we recognise our own racism. And I think that's absolutely fundamentally important. And possible also if we recognise, and you're right, Beck, about division, but I don't think we can expect that everybody is going to share the same view. It's frequently inflicted on us by the state and others that all of us in the community sector ought to all be in the one organisation and sharing the same view. Well, I'm sorry, but there's about 75 trade unions, and there are a number of political parties, and that's not seen as problematic. So I think we need to recognise the reality that we will have slightly different views, but maybe look for allies, because in my view, you can go a certain amount of the way even with people who are conservative. For all the wrong reasons, they want to help, quote unquote, others, but maybe some of what they're looking for is what we're also looking for. You can go a good bit further along the way with people who are concerned to change policies and change practice. There are probably very few who actually want to change the way society is organised. A lot of people want to change how wealth is redistributed. They're happy enough with that bit. But what they don't want to do is change the terms and conditions under which wealth is created. And I think we can walk the road with each of those, the conservatives, the ones in the middle, and the radicals, provided we know what we actually stand for ourselves. And so I'm saying we need to be clear about what we stand for. And we also need to be clear about our own capacity to be racist, and our own capacity maybe to need to be careful to manage our language. You know, I mean, we don't actually empower people. People empower themselves. We create the conditions within which people can actually empower themselves. You know, we have a role and we have a power, and I think we're denying ourselves. And we also have a leadership. And if we deny those, we're just obfuscating the situation. And finally, then, as Eileen said, I think there is a space for positive development at the moment. The stronger we are, I think, Beck, in the end, the stronger we are, the stronger our organisations are, and the clearer we are about what we stand for, you know, the better chance we have of creating positive platforms. I remember I used to say when someone would turn up and say, you know, they were really upset because the local organisation they were working for and now wanted to do something about, more recently, to be getting rid of asylum seekers. In those days, would have been getting rid of travellers. My point about that would be, well, what have you been doing there for the last 3 or 4 years that this organisation is now talking about getting rid of asylum seekers or getting rid of travellers or having nothing to do with asylum seekers? What do you define as the community you should be working with? What idea of what you stand for yourself have you been putting across? How have you managed the situation? How have you managed your own power in the situation? Because even in the last 5 years, I think there have been opportunities to look at how, as community workers, we've managed our own power. Because even though we're fighting hard for some form of autonomous community work at the moment, the reality of life is that community workers have a lot more autonomy in the interactions, a bit like teachers in classrooms, have a lot more autonomy in our day-to-day interactions than a lot of other sectors of society have. And I think we need to use that autonomy to the edge of how it's possible to use it. Thanks.